Hello everyone and welcome to Avantika Designeering series or ADS as we like to call it. Every week on Wednesday, we feature design and technology leaders who share their professional journey, their thoughts on their domain of work, and designeering where the world of design and engineering meet. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that, let's continue with your show.
As the world of user centered design evolves, designers need to focus not just on empathizing with the users, but also on understanding them at a psychological level. It provides a deeper understanding of human behavior and helps designers see things from the user's perspective. It makes giving memorable moments and meaningful and inclusive customer experiences easier. How can designers use user centric design principles to create an impactful overall customer experience? To know more about this theme, in this episode, we interact with Sandeep Karmarkar, Director of Design at Nutanix. With over 2 decades of work experience in design management and leadership, he holds expertise in coaching and mentoring, design operations, user centered design, data visualization, and much more. And that's why, on our journey of discovering designeering, we talk to him about designing pixels to designing careers. Hello, Sandeep. Welcome to Avantika Designeering podcast series. It's an honor and pleasure to host you on our show today.
Thank you, Rohit. Really happy to be here and super excited for the conversation.
So, as an icebreaker question, Sandeep, our mindset frames how we see the world. We have to be an optimistic learner who seeks understanding as a way to guide our actions. The question that I have for you is, how can we adopt a learning mindset to explore the process more deeply to come up with the best design solution?
Interesting question. So, in my opinion, when we really talk about coming up with design solutions, as we all know, design is really problem solving. And in order to really arrive at the best possible solution, I think one needs to understand the problem really well. What does that mean? I mean, we really have to understand what is the problem that we are trying to solve. Whom are we really solving this for? Are there any existing constraints about this problem getting solved? If you know how our users are actually going to solve this, or if they are already solving it in a particular fashion, all of these are cues that you would know to really understand what is a better or probably the best design solution. And of course, in that process, one has to be sort of curious, asking all the right questions, and I also observe continuously about what is really happening. If you end up coming up with a design a solution, is it really working well? And of course, at the end, the most important part is really showing empathy towards the problem, and also people who are going to really get happy with what you end up doing as a solution. So I think those are probably ways to really arrive at coming up with the best possible solution to a particular problem.
Superb. I'll in fact pick out that one important word in the thought that you were sharing, which is being happy, and how it really actually affects the way we design a solution. In terms of, if you're feeling very good about it, if you're feeling very happy about it, I believe naturally the solution is a very, very creative solution out there.
Yeah, I mean, it shows up. It's very hard. I mean, as we all always say, if users are happy, they definitely talk about it. You will hear it in some or the other forum. And if users are sad, you absolutely will hear about it much more than actually when they're happy. So it really is out there. You will get different cues based on which industry you're part of. But definitely the feedback always comes back to you.
Nice. So, on that happy note of setting the context, moving on to your personal journey. Having more than 2 decades of experience in the design industry, and over the years, you partnered with some of the most iconic brands out there. Can you drive us through the last 2 decades and tell us about your professional journey. Did you design this journey to be the way it is? How did all of this happen?
Sure. It's a very interesting question. So, I mean, as Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. So, quite honestly, I had sort of a direction that I had in mind in which way I would like to take this journey in the beginning. But of course, as they say, you really try to go in life from point A to point B. But what really happens in between, it's called life. So, in that regards, I started my career. Way back in 2000, and I would say I sort of went through the journey of from designing pixels to designing careers. What I mean by that is started my journey with a company as a visual designer, and we were in e-learning, and I was really responsible for first taking care of smaller pixels, iconography and illustrations and whatnot. We were making content in flash based technology back then. So I ended up also learning a lot about technology pieces. But I think more importantly than that, I really had the opportunity to work with some of the great people, great leaders, extremely empathetic in terms of sharing information, having real good understanding and maturity to build designers around you. And I think that was kind of foundational in my career if I really look back. So spent about 5.5 years in the e-learning space, and I really wanted to not get into design management, although I had an opportunity back then. I chose not to do that because I still wanted to sort of satisfy the designer within me. I felt 4 years is not good enough time. I should probably spend a little more time into it. So, sort of horizontally moved into Symphony Services. That was my second company. Was consulting with two different companies from Symphony. Thoroughly enjoyed the space and the work that was really doing. But I felt that I really wanted to move on with a product company because the consulting mode was exciting in one particular way. But I think I realized in consulting, you typically do not have a complete ownership. You consult, and based on the contract, you at times do not get to do the end to end work. So after that, I sort of moved on to Oracle. I was heading the human capital management portfolio from India, and that was almost like the beginning of the enterprise journey that I've had for last almost 13, 14 plus years now. Oracle gave me a very different space because enterprise design back in those days was something that not many people knew. Most of the times people look at enterprise design as kind of boring, but it's actually one of the most challenging areas in design because typically you do not have great access to users. You may not even know who the users are many times. Now I guess that situation has changed drastically, but I guess back in those days there used to be almost this thinking that okay, this person is an enterprise user. Of course that's not true because ultimately the same user is using the newer gadgets back then, like the iPhones. And of course there was an expectation that the same individual would like to have better experiences. Then moved on to Cisco, spent again 5 years designing lots and lots of products for internal Cisco customers as well as for our external customers, really taking care of the designing of these very technical and complex like dashboards and all of those pieces. Again, extremely important from a career standpoint because I've met some of the best designers in Cisco, and also that sort of gave me a perspective about uh, from a design management standpoint or design leadership standpoint, what is that ideally a leader can do and sort of create the sphere of influence. Up until recently, when Nutanix is my current company, spent 5 years here, had a fantastic opportunity to start the design team. Always wanted to do something from scratch, like starting a design team, and there was no better opportunity than this particular one. Started the team from scratch, built it to like 19 people, really strong team and strong culture. Extremely happy and satisfied with the way I think we have grown, and just amazed with the maturity, the talent, the growth that I think I am now able to see. So right from designing those pixels earlier to taking control over not just pixels but probably the entire screen, to then flows, then sort of information architecture, entire end-to-end journey, to really at the moment really talking about how do I create experiences and processes so that designers can actually feel that their career is growing. So designing career is, it's been phenomenal last 5 years, and really looking forward to do much more in the same space going forward.
Wow, that's an interesting thought. I got hooked on to designing pixels to designing careers. That's a beautiful thought. And sticking to that thought, I wish to ask you that you've been instrumental in developing multiple brands in the design community, leading strong teams of designers with various specializations like interaction design, graphic design, data visualization, and more. The question that I have for you is, how do you cultivate a mutualistic practice that turns a group of people into a team?
Yeah, I think the way I look at this is it's all about setting a common goal, and it starts really from the time you hire. And as I said, in the previous question, when you do things from scratch, I think you have a lot more liberty, you have a lot more luxury to actually do what is right. Of course, you may have certain challenges in terms of taking over a team who probably may or may not know or understand the common goal, so the communication pattern would be slightly different. But my hiring philosophy has always been attitude over skills. The cultural fitment aspect is extremely important, and to me, I believe if you have the right attitude, even if you do not have the right skills, people can help you, or you can easily acquire those skills. So when we are really talking about these different talented individuals really coming together and working together, it is very important that you have the right attitude to understand that all of us, or all of the people whom you are going to work with, are trying to solve a same problem. It's a common goal, and you are putting in your own expertise into it. For example, spoke about data visualization, or visual design or illustration. Effectively, these are complementary skills, but everybody who is coming with these skills is looking at this from their own perspective. They're wearing their own expertise hat, and really trying to see how best their contribution is going to be to achieve this common goal.
Absolutely. I think that's quite interestingly put in terms of how all of us need to work towards that common goal of adding value to the customer, ensuring that they are delighted, they are happy, they are satisfied with the products that we're creating, and how all of us actually work towards achieving that together. In fact, we design, Sandeep, in the era of the customers, as I was just mentioning, and customers' involvement in design process leads to better products, say that solve real world problems for people. I wish to know, how can we involve users in the initial stage of the design process that usually revolve around immersion, observation, and say contextual framing.
Yeah. So I think these days the sort of common practice is definitely going towards creating these sort of design workshops with end users, or you can almost call it like a collaborative brainstorming sessions with the end users. And again, depending on the industry that you're part of, sometimes it becomes extremely easy for you to really interact with your end users, and sort of having this common shared understanding of empathy with not just end users but also the stakeholders. So I think what is really important, the meta point is to see how best you could involve your users in the process of making with people who are going to make it. So what really happens in that scenario is that the users end up feeling elevated, and almost having a sense of, I think I'm really helping someone to do something because that person or the organization is going to do something right for me ultimately. And when you create these ecosystems in the form of like customer advisory boards, or sort of user testing, or contextual inquiries, as you spoke about, really visiting the end user spaces, what you really do as designers is you increase your empathy about not just users but their environments and in the profile in which they would be using your product or a service in this particular fashion. And I think having this very active ecosystem is extremely important, because when you have your users starting to feel that they are being heard first, and there is a company who is actually investing time and energy in me to really understand what my suggestions are, you're actually creating like this system which is really really super scalable. And then you will see a lot of these folks who will actively participate and giving full support in really evolving what you otherwise would have created just sitting in isolation. So it's a very important aspect, and I think it goes a long long way to have this active participation from the entire user community.
Hey, did you know Nutanix was awarded the 2020 top rated award in the server virtualization and virtual desktop infrastructure category by Trust Radius, and was listed as a top rated HCI system? Absolutely well said. In fact, Sandeep, I wanted to stretch this thought a little. And, if you see, designers have superpowers. They understand people on intellectual and emotional levels and can make people think, feel, and act, say, in a certain way. They help users to readily process the visual stimulus that they perceive in an easily digestible format. The question that I have is, how can designers create digital products specifically designed according to the psychological perceptions of the human brain?
Yeah, so I mean, when we talk about these digital products, I think it is still very important to know that ultimately, no matter what we end up doing, is ultimately for people. And people have certain ways in which we perceive information, because I think most of the human brain uh, is going to function in a particular fashion. So I think what is really important in this context is for designers to really understand and study a little bit about human brain, how information is really going to get perceived. Thinking about simplicity, why simplicity is more important, and why sort of the cognitive overload and the complexity is hard for average Joe. But also some of these individuals in your user base might be with special needs, thinking about people and inclusiveness, about things like accessibility, which I think now is becoming a very well matured topic in design industry. But I think there's still a lot more that we will have to do, especially if you are designing interfaces and products for people with disabilities, or special with special needs, or people with limited motor skills. All of those are really important aspects, because all of these individuals, from their own perspectives, as they say, users are never wrong, it's only how we look at things can be wrong. So if you really understand all of these, the perception of how your product or service is going to be used by a specific human being in this particular case might vary slightly, but there are at a high level at least some patterns or some grouping that you can really think of. And then it is really important then to say, when you're creating your user groups about a particular product or service, how do you best make sure that for a normal user base or a type, what is that you have in the system? And let's say for someone who is having some specific requirements, what is that you can do? Like simplest example is, on the phones you have increasing contrast, increasing fonts, or having those accessibility features. It's a very nice way of making sure that you are being inclusive and really taking care of multiple user types in your design.
Well said. In fact, while you were mentioning about creating products and services for people, who have different requirements, different use cases, that brings me to my next question in terms of the strategy aspect. In fact, if you were to get into, say, the users aspect of it, humans love a simple, compelling story, but we need to shift away from simplified binary thinking more than ever. If we want to design truly sustainable futures, we need to acknowledge our actions, implications, and consider the immense complexity of our world as well, Sandeep. The question that I wish to ask you is, how can organizations explore and shape their strategies according to the tensions arising in a complex and uncertain world? And all of us went through that the last entire 1 year. So how can this be bridged?
Yeah, I think it's going to first, it's a very good question, and I think sustainability in general is going to be extremely crucial as we move forward. And yeah, as you rightly said, the world is changing really fast. Honestly, we do not plan, say, beyond 2 to 3 years, and it really comes down to the basics of really making sure we have ways in which we can keep ourselves nimble. At the same time, in some ways it's just about solving a problem is not going to be appreciated. I mean, you have to think about what indirectly or directly the way in which you're solving a problem is going to create or just going to impact in the ecosystem. For example, uh, there has been a lot of roar about how Amazon ended up using their packaging material, and at times you felt, okay, wait a minute, my the product that I've really ordered is a smaller size, but the pack is really big. Is it really going to be sustainable? And I think they have done a lot of good work where they have very consciously made sure that the waste is limited, because ultimately, since the world is really changing fast around us, it's important that beyond just solving a particular problem, we take slightly bigger lens and really look at, are we really doing right by just people? In It is important then to tweak your strategies accordingly. This also means, I think, that organizations will have to think about just the implementation and also their ability to change fast in this world. Because from engineering standpoint, this might mean that, let's say, if you were to accept a change, and the change could be as simple as, like, recent few examples where, say, a company have designed to change their logo, how easy it is going to be for you to actually change that in the product, because the way it is going to be architected, it might be easiest task or it might be really really painful. And ultimately, yes, designers can sort of drive the agenda here, but unless you have the entire ecosystem, including the implementation strategy, service strategy, it's not going to be super easy for you to even change according to the tensions. So I think the whole system, when you're actually going through creation of a product service, and the whole sort of touch points that users would have to be carefully thought about, and sort of almost there has to be this design thinking applied in all of these, just so that from a serviceability standpoint, from the change management standpoint, it is easy and you could still do what is right as things are changing around you.
Interesting. And again, taking a cue from what you mentioned in while you were talking about this, is creating, or doing things that are right for the user and keeping the user in the center. My next chain of thought, and the question that I have for you comes from there, that if we walk a mile in the user's shoes, it's the most used proverb in designers dictionary. It helps designers to be in close contact with customers and emerge a deeper sense of empathy. But how can we use this tool to create ethical designs that respect the privacy of customers and users? So, when you spoke about smartphones, when you spoke about creating the right product for right usage, I wish to know your thoughts on creating ethical design that respect privacy, which is also off late become a huge concern. While all of us are using digital products.
Yeah, absolutely. I think privacy or just respecting users is going to play a huge role, uh, if it's not already. So yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So typically, if you really look at problem solving, uh, at uh, at a high level, you can categorize this into perhaps two different ways in which you can solve this problem. One could be, as we are all aware of, the design centered, which is user centered design, which is called the UCD principle. And there could be another way of looking at this, which is called the business centered design. And if you come purely from a business centered design, some of the fundamental philosophies and the approach that you may have to really solve a particular design problem would automatically vary, just because I think you probably are putting business first over users. And that's when you would probably see some dark patterns, as it is called, uh, getting really created in the space. And personally, if you ask me, I mean, it's almost like the dark pattern is a way to make sure there is almost one way entry, but you really don't know an easy way out. And there are several examples all around us, which is, you sign up for something which is a service, and it keeps sending you SMSs, or is as simple as, you sign up for something, it's a newsletter. Even if they give you an option to unsubscribe, uh, pretty much never it is that easy. You talk about registering a product, or taking up something, and the dark pattern is, unless you subscribe to us, we won't let you in. So there are plenty of examples where a business might, by design, actually make things hard for users, or almost make it in such a way that even if you want to, users might just find it difficult and they just give up. And I, from a design or sort of ethical design standpoint, feel I do not propose or recommend those patterns, because ultimately, yes, I mean, everybody's in this business is to make money, but I think you cannot leave your ethics behind, because ultimately all of these are going to haunt you. And I think the other angle that you sort of touched upon from a privacy standpoint, I think security is another angle, which at times from a design standpoint is also sort of overlooked. From a testing standpoint, it is overlooked. So there are these white hat hackers, and there are black hat hackers, which is basically hitting it, hacking a system really to see if there are any vulnerabilities, things like that. So especially the privacy concerns can also get amplified or aggravated if you haven't done the basics of security, or like the advanced level of security, because I think with some basic knowledge, there are systems which can be easily hacked, and I think all of that is really not true, and should not be really considered, or followed as a practice. So from a design standpoint, it is really important to also almost take a use case when you're designing a product or service. If somebody is there in the system to break something, which is the sole notion of, okay, I want to just break this, which is a worst case scenario, especially true for banking and data critical applications. I think the designer has an additional responsibility to really figure out, how do I make sure that we would not allow like the privacy breach or a security breach in in this fashion, or if somebody with that unethical intent is coming in, the person can be stopped. And OTPs and the additional two-way authentication system are just example, I think, where we have solved this to some extent.
Hey, did you know the Washington Post named Nutanix one of the top workplaces in 2020 in the DC area? Nutanix was one of 200 companies recognized, and insight was gathered from employee satisfaction within the company. Interesting. In fact, while you were talking about SMSs, I was just thinking about what kind of pain some of these messages are, and how annoying they are. In fact, when you look at it from the other angle, Sandeep, differentiation is a synonym of design, and design strategy helps in achieving the differentiation. It diverges substantially, exploring all kinds of ideas, and then brings analytical tools to evaluate the potential of the ideas created. The question that I have for you is, how can designers define intertwined experiences between brands and peers to deliver memorable moments for the end user?
Interesting. So when you really look at, and if you really dissect the memorable moments, if you really go back and ask yourself what were some of the memorable moments that you probably had in your life, or experiences from an experience design standpoint, you'll probably arrive at a smaller set. And typically it is about you or someone going extra mile to solve for almost like an unexpressed desire, or almost like the aha moment. So, really talking about personalization and creating some aha moments for the user is perhaps one way where you can do this. And I'll give you some examples. If you go to, Paytm, and I ended up actually recharging sort of a DTH recharge on Paytm. The next time I was on Paytm trying to do this, the previous number and every other detail was just remembered, assuming that I'm going to come back and do probably the same action. Now, did I actually express that as a desire? No. But was I really happy? It was a memorable. I mean, the reason I'm talking about it now just makes the point very clear that it was memorable because somebody, or in this case, the product, ended up doing something that I did not even ask for. I'll give you a similar example from, say, a human context. If you go to a restaurant, or if you go to any hotel, and if they come to know that you have a special occasion, it could be a birthday or anything of that sort, they will typically try and sort of give you a surprise or please you by either offering free buffet breakfast or any of that. So you really do not or you haven't expressed that, but the moment it is coming to you, you suddenly feel, oh wow, aha, great, I'm really happy. All of these are ways in which you first make this extremely personalized, at the same time making sure that you are creating some memorable moments or experiences for your end users. And there's one more example that perhaps that I can talk about, which is, let's say you go to a particular restaurant often, uh, and you go to a restaurant and you typically order a particular dish. How how satisfying it is. Let's say a waiter walks to you and says, "Sir, how would you? What would you like to have today? Is it just the usual menu that you typically try?" And you suddenly feel, "Oh, wait a minute! I don't even have to express what I typically do, because, like, let's say Swiggy or Zomato's would typically know what you order. In this case, this human is actually making sure that they know my personalized taste, and they're also indirectly helping me to sort of not process too much of information and almost guiding me in that." So I think those are some memorable moments for me. And in general, the meta point is, if you really put an effort to remember your users or know much more about users, eventually you will find users remembering you.
Absolutely, and doubtless in terms of creating these delightful moments to ensure that there's a high top of the mind recall for your brand, and that leading to loyalty in the customer's ecosystem. And while, Sandeep, we can keep talking about the user and the experiences around them, I would want to bring the twist of the technology world to this. So the digital world is moving towards more immersive experiences. In fact, it is only a matter of time for 3D and extended reality to become standard in product design. Understanding changing technologies is crucial for creating product design and, say, VR experiences. The question that I have for you is, what are some of the new emerging opportunities for user experience designers, and how can they expand their tool set and adjust to the latest technologies?
Yeah, I think, as you rightly said, the 3D, the virtual reality or mixed reality is going to take on a lot more. So when I look at it in terms of sort of the emerging trends, I think service design in general, which is either you talking about not just a product, but really going beyond a particular product and really talking about the end-to-end service design experience, because in that space you might have several touch points before the customer is actually going to consume a particular service. I think that's definitely emerging. A lot of companies are actually putting a lot of effort on overall customer experience. Now this might just not be about physical or any tangible products or interfaces, but ultimately what a customer at the end of the day is really going through as an experience. Yes, I think the virtual reality, designing for virtual reality, design for mixed reality or sort of augmented reality, we've already been seeing a lot of new product services in that particular space. So I think that still continues to be an area where designers absolutely can add a lot of value, because you have a very different world. And I think having a designer who can really think from a, again, empathetically from user standpoint in a space which is completely new, like virtual space, is really going to be very, very exciting. I also feel that game design is again one area where user experience designers can add a lot of value. I mean, some of the famous games, from Epic Games, if you see like Fortnite, they actually work with UX and experience designers to figure out how to make. I mean, it's the game is designed so nicely that it's almost addictive. Now that's a downside of it, but you have designers who are actually making sure all of the complexities of the game design are almost simplified, the interface is really taken care of. So again, it's a very different way of applying user experience practices into a very different industry. And of course, the sort of ever increasing smart devices, smart cars, smart bikes, have digital touchscreen on electric bikes, and all of those things are absolutely new. And it is definitely going to pose new set of challenges, be it touchscreen based challenges or environmental based challenges. And you would definitely would need to have a designer who can very empathetically think about all of these different areas that we just spoke about, and effectively solve problems where you just don't feel like you are almost in total control of technology. I think the most important challenge, I think, as we move on, will be to make sure the designer is almost driving this point that the user always feels that they are in control.
Wow, Sandeep. How I wish we could continue our conversation for a longer duration, but in the interest of time, it brings me to the last question. We've coined a term at Avantika University called as designeering, which is a blended approach to design and engineering, and that's how we are coaching our students at the university. The question that I have for you is, do you think that all of these ideas could be weaved together and help young designers create something outstanding?
First of all, yeah, I mean, I really like the term. I've always believed that designers should definitely know the technology in whichever space that they're in, to really understand and then hence create better design experiences. I mean, if you really talk about printing as a technology, if you're, let's say, a graphic designer who mainly interacts with printers day in day out, or perhaps would be working in that space, it is paramount for you to know how offset printing works. I mean, if you don't know printing industry, you perhaps can't do much. Similarly, architects cannot ignore the knowledge of civil construction and all the nuances of that. So in the user experience space, again, I've always been a believer that, as a designer, you should, if not know coding, but at least know the limits of what is really out there, what is really possible. And I think from what I understand, you guys are actually trying to combining these two otherwise not so connected spaces. So first, kudos to having this blended approach. I also know another place, which is IIT Gandhinagar. They also encourage actively their students to take on a design course, at least one design course, short course, irrespective of the disciplines that they come from, which is, it could be even chemical engineering for that matter. But I think overall it's a great initiative, and I would really hope that a combined knowledge, not just about design, but even engineers coming from engineering side having design knowledge, again can go back to this common goal that we spoke about. And with that common goal, then create really immersive memorable experience to solve some very critical problems that we are all going through and are going to come across in the future. So good initiative.
Wow, Sandeep, thank you so much for that parting thought. It has been a pleasure interacting with you. I'm sure there's so much more to talk to you about, but we'll leave our listeners to connect with you on social media and actually connect with you offline to discuss more on this. Thank you so much for doing this and inspiring our listeners, giving them a direction in their design journey.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you first for the opportunity. And yes, it was a wonderful conversation. I hope at least, there are some thoughts that would be intrigued. And I'm happy to have people connected to me on any of the social mediums to really take this conversation forward. Again, thank you very much.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed our show. Do write to us on ads@avantika.edu.in. We look forward to your opinions, feedbacks, and suggestions of speakers you would like us to host on this show. Do tune in our channel next week on Wednesday for a new story on Hubhopper or wherever you get your podcast from. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.